I'm Stephanie Rowland. I am with the North Mason Chamber of Commerce. I'm so thrilled to be here today, co-sponsoring this event with the Shelton Mesa County and also with the Economic Development Council, Kevin and Deidre. I came out of retirement, in April, after about 4.5 years away. So I just want to quickly say, there is life after retirement. Yay! And my goal was to live somewhere on the water where I could walk to get milk, coffee, and a cocktail. And I found that in Gig Harbor. So I live in Gig Harbor, but I want to share, when I come on 302 and I go around Victor and then I come up, there's nothing like Hood Canal. So thank you very much for giving me a reason to come back to my initial home. So today, we just want to kick off this wonderful event. So let's get to the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. So good morning, everyone. My name is Deidre Peterson. I'm the President and CEO of the Shelton Mason County Chamber. I would like to welcome first this morning our legislators. So Senator Drew MacEwen, Representative Dan Griffey, and Representative Couture. We are proud to convene our legislators as we look forward to the 2025 session. The chambers and the EDC collectively serve as the voice of the business community. At the chamber, we make it a point to be at the heart of important issues like workforce development, quality of life, and civic engagement. The chamber's public policy guidelines address a variety of issues from environmental stewardship and arts and culture to affordable housing and infrastructure to efficient governance and balanced labor practices. Ultimately, we advocate for policies and programs which create an environment in which businesses can thrive and expand.
Thanks, Deidre. The Economic Development Council of Mason County is focused on supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs in our community. We recognize the tremendous value local employers bring to our community and our economy, and it's our mission to provide them with the support that they need to grow their businesses here in Mason County. This support begins with advocating for a fair regulatory environment, modern infrastructure, workforce training and career pathways, and affordable housing. Before we dive into our discussion this morning, let me quickly set the stage by outlining the structure and focus of the Washington Legislature's long session. The longest 105 days of your life.
It's pretty long.
Did longer than some of the controls that were
But
short.
the funny part is the 60 days don't seem all that much shorter than 105, so legislative math. So particularly though as it relates to our business and economic interests, Washington State crafts its critical budgets, operating, capital, and transportation on a biennial basis. It's every 2 years. And the upcoming 2025 legislative session marks the start of the 2025-2027 fiscal biennium. Regular 105-day sessions held in odd number years like 2025 are pivotal as they set the state's comprehensive budget and establish the legislative agenda for the next 2 years.
For businesses, these long sessions are especially significant. The capital budget process during this time provides opportunities to secure funding for infrastructure projects that support economic growth, while operating budget addresses funding for education, public safety, and other essential services. Additionally, transportation planning during this session can have long-term impacts on regional connectivity and commerce. This extended session allows for more in-depth deliberations on policies that will shape the regulatory environment. As business leaders, it's crucial that we remain engaged throughout the session, sharing concerns, offering solutions, and advocating for investments and policies that will drive economic growth and create opportunities for our communities. As we listen to our legislators today, let's engage in a productive dialogue about how these policy decisions can support the business and climate, stimulate economic development, and foster a more conducive environment for small businesses to thrive in these challenging times.
Now that we've kind of covered the basics here, we'll move into our legislative discussion. To maximize our time, we'll rotate through questions directed to specific legislators this year, with opportunities for others to add a brief comment if they wish. Following the panel discussion, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of our legislators. So please be ready with specific business-related and economic-related questions. I think there are also note cards on the tables and some pens, I think from Peninsula Credit Union, maybe? And so just make sure that you're writing a clear, concise question on there. And I think Katie might be around to gather those up in a little bit. So let's get started. I have a general question for our three legislators. So we'll begin with this question for you all. Washington's legislative process operates within a traditional majority-minority framework. What priorities are realistic for funding under this system, and how do you determine which initiatives are most achievable?
Good, Charles. Well, you start.
Is it on?
Okay.
Well, just wanted to start off by saying thank you everyone for showing up this early in the morning to listen to the three of us. If you tune into TVW, you can listen to us for 105 days coming up soon. It's really important, you know, obviously I've been in the minority and so have my seatmates been in the minority since the day we were all three elected, various time spans. And so, you know, you have to be pragmatic and realistic about not only our shared priorities, but you know, all three of our counties in the 35th district, Mason, Kitsap, and Thurston, and try to do the best that you can with the resources you have to prioritize. Capital budget last year, we had incredible wins, and also the transportation budget as well, actually all three budgets. You know, you can go onto the LEAP website and see the amount of cash, so to speak, that members bring back to their districts. And although the three of us are in the minority, we often outperform majority party members reinvesting into our own communities here, and I think we're pretty proud of that. You know, of course, each session has its own flavor. Even Tim Sheldon would say that, right? Each session has its own kind of flavor of what's going to be happening, and the flavor of this session is a $10 to $12 billion deficit. And so I think that as we go forward, things are going to be a little bit harder, but you do have to work with the other side. And politics is much like business, right? It's a people game, it's relationships. And so you have to kind of walk a fine line between sometimes being critical and being the faithful opposition in the legislature, while also maintaining relationships so that you can get amendments, that you can get your funding priorities done. And I think that the three of us have done a good job striking that balance.
Well, I don't have much more to share. Thank you all for coming here this morning. I think the best way to answer the question is I don't attack people. I try to vigorously defend our ideas and our traditions here, and it works. Most of the time, if you keep it, if you take the personality out of it, being in the minority isn't as big of problem. But I certainly would love to be in the majority once. That would be really nice. But I find that all of the projects that you all give us are so well done that it's easy to sell to the funders in Olympia. Anyway, thank you so much for coming this morning.
Good morning, and echo the thanks for being here this morning. Good to see everybody. Yeah, and I would add, you know, that when you're in our position, I look at it from what is the most I can do for my district, for the three counties we represent. And that has been my attitude over the time that I've been there, because I recognize I'm not going to get major policy change that I would prefer and that I believe a lot of my constituents would prefer. And so I operate from that mentality that, okay, what can I get done? And that's going to be beneficial to this district. And I look over the past 12 years, and this credit goes to my seatmates as well as to some of our predecessors as well. But over the last 12 years, you know, $1 billion through the three budgets coming back into this district, and that's huge. And when we talk about, you know, moving a community forward, economic opportunity is a big part of that. And so the more dollars we can get into this community, whether it via infrastructure and, you know, it's the sewer issues for the city, transportation infrastructure, operating budget provisos, the more that we can do in that regard, I think lifts this whole community as a whole. And so proud to be a part of that, and where it makes sense and where we can get policy done, we will, or at least make it less bad. And then, I mean, sorry to say it that way, but that's the reality. The good news is, if you're for more taxes, more regulation, you're going to enjoy these next 105 days. It's coming, folks. Yeah, but you know, Travis mentioned a $10 to $12 billion budget deficit. I want to put that in perspective real quick, and maybe we're diving into this in a further question. But let me say, so next year I want to buy a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. So my household's operating at a $7 million deficit then. That's what the state is doing right now. It's the policy wish list, okay, and previous policies that's been passed. And yes, we do have a deficit right now, but I would caution on that figure because it's what they want to spend. And that's going to be the challenge, I think, for us as we go into the legislature. It's like, time out, you know, and let's get back to some budget basics, which is going to be hard for us to make that argument. And you know, Travis is on, you're certainly on appropriations, right?
Yep.
As assistant ranking, and I jumped off that ship when I went to the Senate. You know, get off the sinking ship while you can, so enjoy it. But you know, that's going to be the challenge for us, is to make sure that we put that in the right context of what is really that number, and that's going to be one of the biggest battles, I think, this year. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question we have is for you, Senator MacEwen. With voters affirming the Climate Commitment Act last November, what steps can be taken to manage the program more effectively and ensure it delivers on its environmental and economic goals?
Yeah, and you know, going along with that, the voters also passed 2066, which you know, bans the ban on natural gas, so to speak. So, you know, a little bit of a conflicting message maybe from voters on that. I would also blame the initiative process and how that all works, and that you have somebody that writes the title and the summary of an initiative who had nothing to do with bringing it to the ballot, and so that adds some of the confusion there. But having said all of that, and I was on a panel last night in Tacoma talking about this issue as well with the House Majority Leader. We got a little contentious over this, but I recognize that, and I respect the will of the voters, that, okay, they've affirmed the Climate Commitment Act. I may not agree with it, but it's the law of the land. And so I'm going to operate from the standpoint that let's make sure that this is being the most effective and efficient program that it can be. And I don't believe it has been. And I'll give you an example. You know, the premise of it, if you're not familiar, is that it's to reduce our carbon output as a state between now and 2050, eventually getting us to a carbon neutral market. And in order to do that, your highest polluters, they either have to, the line goes down, so their emissions have to drop between now and 2050. And they can achieve that one of two ways. They can either make investments into their business and how those emissions are outputted to lower their emissions and eventually meet that deadline. If they're not able to, they have to buy credits in the carbon market to offset them exceeding that output. And then that money is coming into the state. It's a huge amount of money since this started, and it's through an auction process that occurs. And so those dollars are coming into the state under the Climate Commitment Act, and then what the intent of the legislation was, we would take those dollars and make further investments into the state to help reduce carbon output and lower greenhouse gas emissions. But what we've seen was how some of that money's been spent has done nothing on, and I'm not saying every dollar, but there's been a number of programs within the Climate Commitment Act that do nothing to reduce carbon pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. We need to make that program more efficient. And that to me is part of the overall problem that we face, because it was so much money, the state didn't know what to do. And I'll give you one example. It's been my pet peeve. We have a Department of Archaeology at the state level, and it's an office that has like 4 or 5 people. And they took Climate Commitment Act dollars to the tune of $250,000 for an FTE to study the impacts of climate change at the Department of Archaeology. We've studied this insanely. Whether you agree with the outcomes of those various studies or not, but why are we hiring yet another person? But it was that kind of stuff that's like, wow, we're spending money on something that's not going to have any impact. These studies have been done, and we're going to take a small agency and throw another $250,000 into it just because we don't know where else to spend it. We could be doing a number of things, increasing our electrical infrastructure, generation capability, our transmission capability. These are huge issues that we face as a state. We could streamline our siting process. Those of you in the PUDs are all too familiar with the challenges we face there with being able to generate more power and being able to transmit it. We could look at doing other incentives to help transition to that to a more of an electrical economy. And again, at the same time, we had this natural gas issue, and I'm glad that initiative passed, because if it hadn't, you were looking at another $40,000 to $50,000 to the cost of a home being built to be quote all electric. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room, housing's gotten extraordinarily expensive in this state. And that was just one more hurdle, and it would have cost businesses north of 6 figures to be able to convert, because natural gas over time would have been going away. It wasn't going to go away tomorrow, but it was being targeted to be phased out. So I'm glad that initiative passed, and we're going to have to work within those contexts. Let's use these dollars in the most economical sense that doesn't add a further burden to folks, and that'll be the message as a ranking member on environment and energy that I'll be bringing forward. So it's going to be, and my counterpart, Senator Wynn, who chairs the committee, he and I, we have a pretty good working relationship. I spoke with him last week. We see, in general, we see eye to eye on that. We might differ a little bit on some of the nuances, but I think we're heading potentially in the right direction doing that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator MacEwen. Our next question is for Representative Griffey. Representative Griffey, retail theft and other property crimes have become increasingly concerning for businesses and communities. How can the state address these issues through policies on enforcement, such as vehicle pursuit laws or retail theft prevention measures, while balancing public safety and accountability?
Well, yeah, it's a real problem. This year, they're estimating $4 billion walk off store shelves in Washington State annually. It is a tragedy. It is an internal inflation driver. You know, a lot of times when we talk about inflation, we talk about a federal policy. Washington State has several areas where we have internal policy-driven inflation. And cost of goods and services in Washington State are reflected in that $4 billion loss. So I have proposed, and I will propose again, a bill that changes the definition of theft and says that you commit the crime of theft when you conceal the item, when you put it in the jacket. A lot of people that engage in organized retail crime, they are very sophisticated and have these big trench coats with these giant sewed-in pockets. Any of you that purchase alcohol regularly, you see that alcohol's locked up. Well, they were stealing in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars of alcohol annually from a store, one store. So I think that if we change that, the policy to where the store is allowed to engage with the individual that conceals the item with intent to deprive the owner of it, it'll go a long ways. So that is just kind of engaging the crime as it's happening. And hopefully the retailer would be able to recover the item so they don't actually have to charge it off as a loss. The second part of the question, it's going to be a real problem. The majority wants to reverse the pursuit law that we just gave back to our law enforcement officers. And that's real tragedy because in every metric that we measure of crime, Washington State is nearly the highest in the 50 states. We have got to take crime and the threats against society very real. We're going to have to, and it's going to be a tough time for us to hold back some of what the reforms that they're asking for. So that's going to be a lot of my 105-day session is working on those issues. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is for Representative Couture. We have been blessed to have very strong leaders in the 35th, and all of you have held leadership roles throughout your years on the delegation. As assistant floor leader, how do you approach opportunities to work across the aisle and demonstrate bipartisanship?
Yeah, it's just a little context. We just had our reorganization, which the caucus does after every election, and then the caucus determines who's going to take leadership roles. Once again, my seatmate, Dan Griffey, is our minority party whip. he'll say they don't actually give him a whip, but maybe we'll have to give him one so he can herd all the cats. You know, Republicans don't like to be told what to do, so it's probably the hardest job in Olympia. But I was, for the first time, elected to leadership in our caucus. I'm one of the assistant floor leaders. That's thank you. So the floor team is a 3-person team. There's two assistant floor leaders and then the overall floor leader. And what we're tasked to do is come up with, you know, what is our messaging in our caucus, you know, on the floor, help develop our agenda priorities for our caucus for the session, and then help put our members of the caucus in the best position to make sure that all of their constituents across Washington State voices are heard. And so it's a big job, but then also, as the question alludes to, you have to work with the majority party. You have to do a little bit of wheeling and dealing sometimes to make sure that Republicans are getting bills passed on the floor, that our priorities are heard. And, you know, sometimes help the majority party pass bills that actually are good. And so one of the reasons I believe that I was elected to that position is because, number one, I'm a military guy. I was in the Navy. You show up to work on time and in the right uniform, right? And so I've never, ever in my time missed a floor vote. I've never missed a floor vote. Sometimes things happen and people have to be absent because they're sick or something else. I have a perfect attendance record. It's important that your floor team is actually on the floor, right? The second thing is in my freshman year, I hung 7 out of 8 floor amendments, which maybe that doesn't seem like a lot to you, but that's actually pretty incredible. Minority party members don't hang a lot of floor amendments on bills on the floor, especially I don't think if you're a freshman. And so I think what that proves for myself, and I hate bragging about myself, is that you know, you can't just throw out an amendment as like a gotcha moment, right, to the majority party. It ruins relationships. What you have to do is you have to be able to willing to collaborate and work with the other person and negotiate. And you got to negotiate from a little bit of a position of strength, which is hard to do from the minority. But I can tell you that sometimes there's bills that just aren't sexy, right? We won't remember them. Maybe they pass around 11 o'clock or midnight, right? But those floor amendments, when we hang those, that's critically important. I recall one bill about the age blind and deaf program where I saved the state probably $100 million on one floor amendment. No one wrote about it, no one cared. But those are the things that the minority party does in Olympia that really go unnoticed and unseen, but really helps our communities, helps our budget process, and helps a lot of other things down the road. And so what's important about the assistant floor leader position or any leadership position in the caucus is you have to stand up for your caucus members, you have to stand up for your communities, and you have a little bit of extra burden on your shoulders to make sure that you're setting the correct agenda going forward and you're being responsible. But then also you have to work with the other side to get things done. And I don't think that the caucus elevates you to those positions unless you've proven that you're able to do so. Thanks.
Thanks, Representative Couture. Our next question is for Representative Griffey, and I think Randy Collins might like this question too. Mason County has seen insurers decline to renew fire insurance policies due to wildfire risks. Are there any state-level initiatives or studies underway to address this issue, and how might it influence housing availability and economic development in our region?
I mean, that is a good question. Washington State has just been rated either the highest or second highest in cost to provide insurance in the nation. Our policies make Washington State a risky place to sell insurance, and since it's a risky place to sell insurance, well, I know there's somebody over here that's nodding.
Rough couple years, guys.
We have got to tackle that, and again, it is another Washington-specific inflationary pressure, right? Have you opened your auto insurance policy and looked at it? The fact that Washington, we continuously have to work with the majority party to educate them that you can't force insurance companies to cover everything, because if they have to cover everything, they will not make a profit. So there is a real risk in the wildfire space. That's why I've opposed full adoption of the WUI code. There are many people that would like to adopt wildland urban interface code. So it would be another code burden that we would place upon the counties. And they would actually have a wildland code that all property owners would have to abide by. The risk there is you're going to give the insurance companies another reason why they shouldn't insure somebody, because there will then be a wildland risk score. So it is something that I'm going to have to watch and tackle. I've asked to be put on the Ag and Natural Resources Committee, I think, because there is another threat that's not just the wildland threat. They want to lock up millions of timber trust acres, which supplies our mill. I'm looking at Lisa right now. Those logs need to go to our mills. They were set aside in perpetuity to fund schools and local things like fire departments through excise monies. And it's going to be a real fight to protect those lands and help out, because you know how bad we need that here, right? Anyway, it's going to be a tough session.
Thank you. Senator MacEwen, given the current political polarization, what strategies can legislators use to reduce division, foster collaboration, and produce practical solutions that benefit all Washingtonians?
Yeah, and I think that's important, and I'll comment real quick. The House, Travis has explained their reorganization. We have our Game of Thrones next week, so our Senate leadership will hit the tournament. We move at our own pace. We had to build in DAP breaks, Metamucil. So the House jumped the gun and did it early. We're also more efficient with the tax dollars. We figured we would do it when we're going to be there anyway next week. You guys took a soy on that, but anyway.
Well, there's two of you there, right? So it's pretty hard for the two of you to decide.
Right. But to the question. One of the unfortunate things in recent times that I think played into the political division was when COVID happened. And I look back when I first got elected, it was pretty common for legislators to go out after the end of the day, and either have dinner together or just have a drink, etc. And members on both sides of the aisle, and also the legislature at that time was closer. There was a Senate Majority Coalition Caucus, which the Republicans controlled. The House was controlled by the Democrats, but you had to work across. You just had to, not only between both parties, but between both chambers. And that forced people to come together and figure things out. And then, that the Senate coalition was lost in 2017, and then the House lost some seats, and then COVID hit. And there was a slew, because a lot of it was because of retirements, people moving on, but there was a slew of new folks that came into the legislature, and that's not good, bad, or indifferent, it just was what it was, but that happened right when COVID happened, and you've got a whole core of a good chunk of the legislature right now in both chambers that for the first time served in person in 2023. And I think that's one of the downsides of what happened when we had these virtual sessions for basically 2 years, that those relationships really never got built. And then we had some serious polarization in the nation that was going on in both parties. And as I've said many times, neither party's got a monopoly on the wackos and the fringe element. We both got them, right? But everything got exacerbated in the last few years, and that didn't help either. And I would really like to see the legislature get back to how it used to be 10 years ago. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but if you look at people and you develop a relationship with them, you're going to find where you do have common ground and you can work together, and I think that's vitally important. And a great example of that, in my opinion, was President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill. Staunch opposites when it came to politics, but made it a point to get together on a regular basis at the end of the day and just build that relationship, build that trust. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with somebody or compromise your own values, but you're going to find where you do have that common ground. And we really, as a legislature, need to get back to that. And I say all that, and now I'm going to take a shot at outgoing Governor Inslee. In 12 years, he showed up in the caucus I was serving in twice. And I'm just like, wow. And I was the #2 Republican at the time in the House on the budget. And never had a conversation. I mean, and I hope with this new administration, that that'll change. Because if you're only talking to the people you agree with, it's just like social media. You're gonna get your own bias confirmed, right? And you gotta get uncomfortable to get comfortable, and I think we need to do more of that in the legislature, regardless of party. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator MacEwen. I also just mentioned you had a great op-ed here the other week talking about this issue, and not just in the legislative context, but also I think in our personal context as well as relationships in community. So thank you for your leadership on that. Next question is for Representative Couture. School construction continues to be a challenge for districts across the state, and districts in our region have struggled at times to pass construction bonds. I think most notably South Kitsap had gone through a number of bond measures to do some school construction. Our North Mason School District is in the process right now of considering a bond to do construction here in the near future. What do you think the state can do to help ensure districts have adequate facilities to meet the needs of the present day and future needs of students?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we mentioned the, 10 to $12 billion deficit, and that's basically kind of started in 2021, right? Where they created a bow wave of new programs and promised us to pay for things in the future that we could not pay for. At the time, revenues are exploding, right? Revenue has over doubled in the last 10 years. And with revenue almost doubling, the amount of money state and local to public schools has increased 83% over the last 10 years. But now when we look across the landscape of K-12, we see that almost across the board, there is huge financial problems. And it just goes to show that you can keep pumping money into something, but unless you fix very systemic problems in K-12, a lot of it always going to have to do with funding. You can talk about the prototypical school model and how broken that is. You could talk about STARS, which is how we deliver transportation and school buses for our kids. That funding model is broken. Special ed has not been fully funded, something that's a chief cause of mine. But when I was on capital budget, we had, capital budget doesn't meet as much as the other committees because a lot of the times you're in little subcommittees with groups of legislators, and I was in the school construction subcommittee, so to speak, for the capital budget in my first year, and there was equal amounts of Democrats and Republicans. The chair of the committee, Steve Theringer, a Democrat, and Joel McIntyre and myself and a few other Republicans on the education or capital budget committees working on how do we fix the problem where we have in our state where there's some areas with more urban, more dense, more rich populations who can afford to pass levies and bonds and make their schools whole. Whereas some communities like ours, you have small school districts who maybe the socioeconomic status of the community isn't conducive to passing a bond or levy, or even if they could, the bond limit is not conducive to them actually getting enough money to make anything happen. And when you have an economy and inflation like Dan mentioned and Drew mentioned before, everything, the cost of construction is really high. It all really goes back to a lot of our building code regulations, which is a huge problem in our state right now, and also some of our energy policies that are a huge problem in our state right now. The cost to comply with some of those for our schools is catastrophic. We've delivered millions of dollars to help our local schools here in the 35th, many of which in Mason County, with capital funds to help improve their schools. But when you deliver, it sounds like when you deliver a small school millions of dollars, that's a lot of money, that's gonna fix a lot of things. It doesn't. You're lucky if you can get an AC system so the kids don't sweat to death in the summertime, right? And so it sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't, and a lot of it is because of these systemic policy problems. So what we did on that subcommittee is, how do we make it more equitable for the rural and versus urban communities so that the smaller districts can have a larger access, easier access to programs like SCAT, which will help with school construction, and how do we solve some of those policy problems? And twice, We have passed the bill that both parties bipartisanly developed in the House, and both times it didn't get signed by the governor or died in the Senate. And so I'm hopeful that we can make some real progress there. Will it solve the world? No, it won't, because a lot of the problems schools have is not just the state policy as far as how do we fund things and funding models, but it's also state policies that affect how consumers, I'll call them, or parents, view schools in our communities in this present day and age. If parents don't trust schools and what they're doing with their curriculums or their school board policies, what happens? They disenroll their kids, and they do record amounts of homeschool right now in our state and record amounts of private school in our state. And even though funding has increased 83% for public schools over the last 10 years, the test scores remain actually lower than 10 years ago. People, if you go to a Morton Steakhouse and you order a $50 steak, or maybe it's $100 now, and you only get a quarter or 50% of the steak on your plate, you're not going to be happy about it, right? And so we have to do a lot better to rebuild trust in our communities with our schools and focus on some of these basics that increase the ELA scores, the English language, reading, writing, increase math. It's unacceptable that 70% of the kids in our state can't do math at grade level. It's simply unacceptable. And then the ask this coming session will be, please put $1.5 billion more into K-12 in various different ways to help stem this. And of course, many people have seen Seattle Public Schools considering closing down. We don't want to consolidate a lot of our small schools. Great View, a K through 8, is one of the best schools in the state, one of the highest performing. And that's because they treat the kids like individuals, they focus on things that matter academically, and they provide the services they need to provide to help families. And so, at the end of the day, we don't want schools like Great View, because of financial issues, to be consolidated into larger districts, right? That would be even worse. It would not help. And so what do we do about it? We have to have a mixture of fixing systemic problems before we invest more money into it, or else you're just throwing more money into the black hole. And right now, where schools are cutting, they're cutting para-educators, which help our students with the most needs, and it's unacceptable. I mean, you can actually go get a job at Taco Bell and make more money than a para-educator that makes the biggest difference in our classrooms. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion on K-12 funding this year. The construction side of it is one piece, but the curve across the state for passing levies and bonds is going down. It's almost impossible to pass a bond now. It's going to be almost impossible coming soon in the years to come to pass a levy. And that's only a 50% threshold. And so it has to be more than just fixing policy in Olympia, but we have to stop mandating schools do things that don't fit our communities, right? And we have to focus on improving scores, we have to focus on safety in our schools, and we have to deliver the things that we actually have to deliver in our schools, and that's how you start rebuilding trust. One time I lied to my dad when I was a kid, and he told me that if you lie, it's like emptying out a bucket of water. You have to start over from scratch. And to rebuild the trust, you fill the bucket up with one drop at a time. And so it's going to be hard, you know, and there needs to be some self-reflection and not just our schools and our school boards, but us as a community. We don't want our public schools to go away. We have to save them, and in order to save them, we have to have tough conversations.
Thank you so much. We're going to pause here real quickly. There are yellow cards on your table and pens. If you have a question you would like us to ask today, time permitting, go ahead and write that down now. Just raise your card up and Katie will come collect those. We did have a handful of questions that were submitted via the online form, and we'll get to as many as we can today, but we do have just a couple more questions for our legislators before we move to that section of the program. So if you have a burning question that is business or economic related, please go ahead and take care of that now. Going back to our panel here, gentlemen, how might a Ferguson administration differ from Governor Inslee's? What policy areas should we expect to see a new focus or change in direction, if any? And how do each of you plan to work with the new governor's team to advance priorities for our region and the state?
I guess I'll start. Well, I mean, if you believe what the new governor campaigned on, he wants to do something right and real on crime. And I'm dubious on that. I hope he is. Like, Travis and I worked very aggressively, and Drew was involved too, on real legislation on how sexually violent predators are released in the community and if they should be released in the community. And his team was a very active and engaged partner in that. But when it came to helping get the bill passed, even though they were fully in the development stage, half of the bill they asked for, they weren't much help. So I'm hoping, and I will give him benefit, and his team the benefit that he is really willing to work. So I will do what I always do, even with the Inslee administration, educate them on the needs of the district and ask them for common sense solutions to the problems that we have. And I will be an active partner in all of those discussions, especially on public safety, as I plan to be on the Public Safety Committee again, Community Safety, Justice, and Reentry.
Yeah.
It's a really tough.
Let's go with the crime committee.
It's the crime committee. That's why I keep calling it public safety. So crime and punishment committee. So I expect he's going to want to make a name for himself. So I want to use that opportunity to say, hey, you want to make a name for yourself? Help us fix some things. And so I think we'll have opportunities, and I will take that opportunity.
The clock's ticking for him. I'll go back to 2012. I got elected at the same time that Governor Inslee did, and within a week of the election, then Governor-elect Inslee had called every legislator and said, "What are the priorities for your district? What's most important?" And I really appreciated that. And obviously, he and I don't see eye on a number of things, but you could. There was more of a conversation with him. I have yet to receive that phone call. I actually called him, congratulated him. I haven't gotten the call back. Has he called you guys?
Mm-mm.
It's 147 phone calls. When you're in a campaign, you make that number of calls between 8 and 10 a.m.
Yep.
So, and I don't mean to come out all critical, but I'm just like, man, there's an opportunity here to turn a new leaf, and it's not happening. Transition is certainly tough for any new administration, regardless of party, and but I think there's some wasted capital that's happened here in the last month that could have gone a long way. So we'll see. I would like to be optimistic. I think he's certainly will be looking to drive a hard agenda, and what his relationship will be like with the legislature. I only can reference what it was like when he was Attorney General, and I just don't know. I don't know. It's for me, it's a major unknown, and I do hope that one of the things that, like I mentioned before, even though I just gave that compliment to Inslee, as this administration progressed, he detached more and more from the legislature, and I think that's the wrong move. And so I've been hopeful that we would see that change as well. So I'm in a wait and see mode, and the ball's in his court. I made my call to him.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add there. If anyone follows me, they know that I've been extremely critical of our government. But also I've collaborated with him at least twice now, or maybe 3 times now, on different pieces of legislation that one passed through committee, and maybe we'll get that done this year. Revolving around artificial intelligence and sexually violent predators. And so I guess what I'm hopeful about is that some of that kind of collaboration continues in the places where it matters. And I do hope that, the governor, I feel, this is my personal opinion, should stand a little bit above their party and be a governor for all of the people of Washington State. And that means, maybe sometimes bucking the fringe of your own party to kind of govern from the center and to listen to both sides, because we might be in the minority, but we represent over 3 million people in this state, our minority caucus. And I felt like to me in the last 2 years under Jay Inslee that those 3 million or so voices were flatly ignored in almost every single conceivable way. And it's not to say you have to, like Drew said earlier, that you have to change your values or what you believe in, but governing from the center does present a real opportunity. This is a fresh start for Bob Ferguson, and he can prove all of his haters, including me, wrong, right? That you can govern from the center and listen to all the voices in your state. So I sincerely hope and I wish him the best of luck in doing that, and if he wants to do that, I'll help him do that. But at the same time, like Dan said, I'm a little dubious. Like, you get burned enough times, you're not so trusting anymore. But I do think that he will be a different governor in Inslee in some different ways. Like Dan mentioned, I think that he might be a little bit stronger on crime. That's the hope. Might be a little less, and Drew's probably hoping this as well, like a little less militant about some of our kind of way out of left field environmental policies in this state that just are not doable right now. And so those are my hopes.
Does anyone have a question card they'd like us to come collect? Otherwise, we'll move to the questions that were submitted in advance.
Last call.
Oh, she's ready
We got one
vigorously.
coming, but we'll go ahead and get started.
As we wrap that up, we'll go into some of the questions that were sent to us online. First off is for any of the three of you, do any of your committees focus on food insecurity in Washington, and what are some of the measures that you've seen to address that issue?
Yeah, so I serve on the Human Services Youth and Early Learning Committee, which does both social services, including we do some policy on food banks and stuff like that. And actually, my first ever bill that I passed was about child malnutrition, to try to help curb child malnutrition and food security in our schools, and making sure that kids have a little bit more access to free and reduced lunch. That's something that I think unanimously went through. So on appropriations as well, sometimes we deal with food security issues. And I want to give a shout out to the North Mason Food Bank. We delivered some capital budget funds to make sure that they can relocate to a new facility in Belfair. Used to be on Highway 3 with like no parking, little tiny facility. I mean, even if you needed access to the food bank or you needed to drop off stuff to the food bank, you really couldn't get in. Now we converted an old bar into the new food bank. It's fantastic. You can't find alcohol there anymore, but you can get a meal. The new executive director there has been absolutely awesome. And so, especially in times of hard economic times, high inflation, people need calories, right? And the cost of calories is high. You see more action at your food banks and need for food when times are tough. And actually, the cost per week of groceries, Washington State is the highest in the nation. We're higher than California, cost per week of groceries. And so our food banks were critical. We knew that this was happening. We wanted to make sure people had access to our food bank, but truly we just helped out. The real stars are the board of the food bank and that new executive director. And I've told people this before, I like funding projects that are run by people who are go-getters that get things done. Because sometimes you fund projects that are good ideas, but they kind of flop because you don't have the right people running them. But there's some people in this room, I think that when you give them money, they really turn lemons into lemonade. And so, thanks.
Thank you. This next question, we're going to ask you to look into your crystal balls just a little bit. What changes do you expect from Mason County in the next, say, 10 years? And what proactive measures do you think are needed?
I mean, I think the one that I really want to talk about is we're gonna be driving on a new road in Belfair in that time, and it's gonna not be 10 years. We'll be driving on it in less than 3 years, I'm hoping. This team has worked, magic to keep the thing afloat, and we're buying land now. And I'll tell you what, buying land is a real good sign for a project. So any of you project doubters and been hearing me for the last 10 years, we're getting a bypass. I really think we're getting a bypass now. So, and with that, there's going to be some changes, right? I think what we're gonna need to see where we're gonna grow. We're gonna have to work with the EDC, and I've already talked to our new EDC director about some of his visions and paths forward. And that will directly benefit a lot of the people in this room. I mean, more people are going to need insurance. More people are going to need housing. I think we're going to build a lot more housing in Mason County. So I think Mason County is going to see a renaissance. I think thanks to you, Commissioner Shetty, and the rest of the commissioners, Commissioner Trask, we're sitting in a real good place where a lot of other counties are not. So we can keep growing and keep going on our path where other counties are going to actually have to start retracting and drawing back. So I think there's a lot of good in store for Mason County, and it's going to be a fun ride. Hold on.
I just add to that real quick, those are, the positives are happening, and I think one of the growth challenges we're gonna have is the continued migration of people as they're getting priced out of the I-5 corridor. And we're seeing that more and more into our county. Lewis County is now seeing it. And those are opportunities and are also challenges, and so I just, look to our county commission to make sure that you're vocal, and, we gotta be proactive in what, in getting the needs met ahead of time so that it's not an issue. And again, I think some of our private stays are ahead as a county.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience here on Senate Bill 5583. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you what that is.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So Senate Bill 5583 was a bill to help provide financial assistance for underserved youth to help get their driver's licenses, to help increase workforce. Is this a bill that you can stand by and support if it's reintroduced?
Candidly, I don't remember the bill, and I'm guessing since you said it have to be reintroduced, it was never brought to a vote, and so, and I don't mean to deflect on it, I don't think this is a major issue, but I'd have to look at it. But folks, we get 5,000 bills in a biennium, and you just don't look at them all, you can't. So, I think generally speaking, most legislators, you look at the bills that are coming before your committees, and then you certainly deal with those and ones that end up on the floor vote. And so out of 5,000 bills, you might be working on 800 of those, of which maybe 300 to 400 actually come to a floor vote. So I'm guessing this is probably one of the ones I just never frankly saw. So certainly be open to it from the general description of it.
We'll end this area with just one additional question, if anyone else has anything they'd like to add. What do you think may be the key piece of legislation that you're looking forward to supporting this next session?
Well, as I mentioned before, Representative Couture and Senator MacEwen and I, our constituents asked us to do something real on the release of sexually violent predators in the community. Expect to see a bill with all of our names on it that would accomplish that safety and security goal that, and I'm going to put most of my effort into that, and the retail theft bill. We got to do something real about both. The risk of sexually violent predators being released in the community, I cannot overstate. If you get the sexually violent predator designation, it is almost impossible to fully treat. At best, it'll be a chronic condition that we will have to supervise for the rest of the individual's life. To get sexually violent predator designation, you will have had to stalk and target people for in a sexually violent manner multiple times. So I expect that that's going to take a lot of our time and effort to get it over the top. But the retail crime, I cannot emphasize. We have got to get on top of that. Those are my two for now.
Yeah, really quickly, I'm going to be introducing legislation on our juvenile justice system. We have a 24-25% spike in juvenile crime in this state, and so along with that, I'm going to be continuing my efforts to curb the scourge of fentanyl, especially as it relates to our child welfare system, babies and toddlers dying in homes because they're reaching for mom and dad's fentanyl. It's unacceptable, it's tragic, and of course echo the legislation. I think we will get something done on sexually violent predators this year. But those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to.
Most of mine would be related to to energy and environment, and I'm still working through those. One of the, Travis mentioned it earlier, I think, or Dan did, on the wildfire issue and the liability that our utility companies are facing. That's a huge issue, and with my counterpart, Senator Wynn, we've had some initial conversations there, and so we're still formulating that, and I think there'll be some good bipartisan solutions that we can put forward there. So I'll be focusing on that, and then also, just on a show of hands, how many people in here have ever voted for, like, say, good space guy? You know who I'm talking about, maybe, right? I personally am getting tired of the way our ballot is, and it's a joke. I mean, you have 36 people that'll run for a given office. I think we need to look at some reform and what it takes to get on the ballot. It should be, one hand, relatively easy, but it shouldn't be that easy. And both parties have their jokesters that are always going forward, and so I've been having some conversations from the other side, with the other side of the aisle on, should there be a little more of a threshold to get on the ballot? A lot of states, you have to get signatures, and I think, and so this is something I'm looking into. I'm not gonna necessarily die on the hill over this issue, but I think we need to look at some reforms there, that you gotta be able to show some level of support for your pathetic campaign that you're not gonna win. And again, I'm saying that about those that are the jokesters that want to get on there, and there's a cost, there's a real cost to counties that have to print the ballot that ends up being multiple pages in the primary, and to the state as well. And so that's another area I'm looking for some solutions on. We're not quite there yet, but be forthcoming.
Thank you so much.
Real quick.
Thank you,
Sorry,
everyone.
quick one.
Oh, please.
I had a moment and I forgot. Some two things I wanted to just really briefly
You're too
say.
young to have moments.
One thing that's really important to our community, I'll have some big things on childcare. I think will be important to our communities and our businesses, but also I'll be pushing forward, again, a bill to end the cap and fully fund special ed in our state. It's long past due, it's gotta end.
Thank you. Just want to thank everyone who provided questions, our single question from the audience here, but all of those who were submitted in advance. We really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen, for being willing to answer any and all of the craziness that we throw at you, and for joining us here this morning. We are so grateful for your willingness to continue to serve our community and collaborate with us. The chambers and the EDC are committed to working together and with you to seize those opportunities and really foster a healthy economy and a strong community. So we can't say enough how much we appreciate your time this morning, your time leading into the very long 105-day session, and for continuing to make yourself available to us as concerns come forward.
For the rest of you, today you heard directly from our legislators about their priorities and plans, and this is your opportunity to continue a meaningful dialogue with them. I'm sure they'd be happy to stick around for at least a couple of minutes and chat with you if they're able, but also to encourage all of you to continue to engage with them throughout the legislative process. Share your concerns freely, offer constructive solutions, and when possible, if it's an issue that you care about, get in touch with them to testify or submit your support or opposition to issues that matter to you and your business. Advocacy is a collective effort. It's not just what we as the EDC and chambers do, it's what all of us do together, and it's our responsibility to support them in their work in Olympia on our behalf.
Lastly, I'd just like to say a special thank you to our sponsors today, Green Diamond Resource Company and Sierra Pacific. Thank you so much for your support. Also, big thank you to Alderbrook Golf for today's fabulous breakfast, and thank you to all of the staff who took such great care of us while we were here. And of course, Deidre, thank you Mason Web TV for covering. So for those folks who weren't able to be in the room this early morning, they can hopefully at least get their eyes on the issues and see some of the things that we can expect coming ahead. As a reminder, we will have a recap of today's program on our website. We'll be posting that on our blog, on the social. I also saw that Jude Williams from the Journal was here, so we've had some other media in the room. I hope we get great coverage. We just really appreciate your time and attention this morning on this very foggy, very chilly winter morning. We're so pleased to have you with us. So thank you all again. Thank you, Stephanie Rowland from the North Mason Chamber, Kevin Schutte from the EDC, and on behalf of the Shelton Mason County Chamber, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you, gentlemen.
And Merry Christmas.